Good evening and welcome to today's debate. I am Dr. Smoothby Rain, but you can call me Smooth. Our two participants today are both conservatives, but they have different views on Israel. On one side, we have John, a staunch pro-Israel conservative, and on the other side, we have David, a conservative with critical views on Israel. Let's start the discussion. John, please begin.
Thank you. As conservatives, we value the principles of freedom, democracy, and national security. Israel represents the only true democracy in the Middle East, a region that is rife with authoritarian regimes, radical ideologies, and terrorism. Supporting Israel is not just about defending an ally, but about defending the values we hold dear in the West. Israel has been a consistent partner in the fight against terrorism, and it serves as a vital bulwark against Iranian expansionism. The security of Israel is directly tied to the security of the West, and I believe America's alliance with Israel is crucial for the stability of the region and for our own national interests.
Thank you. While I do believe in strong national defense and supporting democratic values, I have concerns about the uncritical support we've given Israel over the years. My primary issue with Israel is the way it treats the Palestinian people and the ongoing occupation of Palestinian territories. As conservatives, we should be advocating for self-determination and the protection of human rights, not just turning a blind eye to the abuses and injustices that have been taking place. Israel's policies in Gaza and the West Bank, its expansion of settlements, and its treatment of Palestinians undermine the very values of freedom and justice that we as conservatives hold dear. This has led to instability in the region, and it's costing us in terms of international credibility. It's time for the U.S. to reconsider its relationship with Israel and encourage peace, rather than blindly supporting its policies.
I understand your concerns, but the situation is far more complicated than you're presenting. Israel is surrounded by hostile neighbors, many of whom openly call for its destruction. The country has every right to defend itself against terrorism, including from groups like Hamas and Hezbollah. The idea that Israel is solely to blame for the lack of peace is misguided. The Palestinian leadership, including both the Palestinian Authority and Hamas, has repeatedly rejected offers for a two-state solution, which would have granted them their own state alongside Israel. What more could Israel do? Should it unilaterally disarm while surrounded by enemies who would seek to wipe it off the map?
John, I don't deny that Israel faces real security threats, but the issue goes deeper than just defense. The constant expansion of settlements in the West Bank and the blockade of Gaza, which affects millions of innocent civilians, aren't just security measures, they are provocations. Israel claims to want peace, but its actions suggest otherwise. Every time they take more land, every time they bulldoze homes, it makes it harder for a two-state solution to become a reality. It's one thing to defend yourself, it's another to infringe on the rights of an entire population. If we truly value democracy and self-determination, we need to apply those principles to both Israelis and Palestinians.
David, I don't think you're seeing the bigger picture here. Israel's security concerns are not just hypothetical. They are not like the issues we face here at home, they are life-or-death decisions. When Israel pulls out of territories like Gaza, as it did in 2005, what happened? Hamas took over, and the violence against Israel increased exponentially. There's no peace partner on the other side. In fact, Israel has offered peace numerous times, but it's been rejected by Palestinian leaders who are more interested in jihad and the destruction of Israel than in negotiating a real peace. Israel can't simply give up territory and expect things to get better. You don't negotiate with people who want you dead.
But John, the cycle of violence is exacerbated by Israel's policies. When Palestinians see their land shrinking, when they're faced with restrictions on their movement, and when they face constant military occupation, it breeds resentment. It pushes people toward extremism. Supporting Israel unconditionally does not bring about peace, it enables the continuation of this violence. Look at how the U.S. is viewed around the world. It's not just about Israel's survival, it's about the moral position we're taking. We're supporting a state that is perceived as an occupier. And that's not a conservative stance to me. Conservatives should be for peace, for justice, and for self-determination for all people.
I get where you're coming from, David, but I disagree with the premise. The reason there's no peace is because the Palestinian leadership is not interested in a fair and lasting peace. They've been offered the land, they've been offered sovereignty, but they've rejected it in favor of violence. The Israeli government has its flaws, sure, no government is perfect. But Israel is a democracy, and it's trying to navigate incredibly dangerous waters. The US has always stood with Israel because we recognize that its survival is tied to the survival of the West itself. Without that support, Israel could very well be annihilated.
Do you really believe Israel will be annihilated by Hamas? This group has no military structure besides being a terrorist cell. Hamas attacking Israel is the equivalent of throwing stones at a tank. I don't think unconditional support is the way forward. Yes, Israel needs to defend itself, but we should be advocating for a change in policy, toward peace, not perpetual conflict. I believe that a just and lasting peace in the Middle East requires addressing the root causes of the conflict, not just propping up one side. Israel has a responsibility, just as the Palestinians do, to work toward a peaceful solution. If we truly want to be a force for good, we should encourage both sides to negotiate in good faith and push for a solution that respects the rights of all peoples involved.
But David, have you ever been to Israel?
Is that relevant to the discussion?
No, I haven't been to Israel personally, and I'm upfront about that. But not having visited doesn't disqualify someone from engaging critically with a nation's policies, just like I don't need to live in Washington, D.C. to critique our federal government. My views are based on extensive reading, first-hand accounts from people who have been there, including Israeli and Palestinian voices, and a deep engagement with conservative principles like individual liberty, national sovereignty, and limited government overreach. I want to be clear. My criticism is not of the Israeli people or of Judaism. I respect both. It's about holding an ally to the same moral and strategic standards we expect from ourselves. Conservatives believe in accountability, and that includes the foreign aid and diplomatic support we give abroad. Blind loyalty isn't patriotism, it's negligence. So whether I've stood in Tel Aviv or not, I have every right, and I'd argue even the responsibility, to question policies that I believe run counter to our values and long-term interests.
David, I respect that you've put thought into your views and done your homework, but I have to say, not having been to Israel does matter, especially when you're speaking so critically about the situation on the ground. When you visit Israel, you understand how small and vulnerable the country really is. You see just how close everything is, how a rocket fired from Gaza can land in a kindergarten in Sderot within seconds. You talk to Israelis who have lost family to terror attacks, or who have to send their kids into the military as teenagers. You also meet Israeli Arabs who live, work, and vote freely in Israeli society, something you rarely hear in the media. It's not about blind loyalty. I'm all for accountability. But when we criticize an ally without fully understanding the context or what they're up against, we risk undermining not just Israel's security, but our credibility as conservatives who claim to stand for democracy and strength abroad. You wouldn't judge the US based solely on what foreign news outlets report about us. The same principle applies here. Seeing it with your own eyes makes a big difference. I'd encourage you to go, talk to people on both sides. I think you'd come back with a deeper, maybe even more nuanced, perspective.
I disagree that me not being there would have an effect on my ability to criticize Israel or make my view less valuable. I will acknowledge that maybe I would learn more if I went there, but it seems to me as if you are insinuating that if I went I would think that Israel is right and the Palestinians are wrong. I think it is extremely important here to explain the Palestinian perspective. I think understanding it is crucial if we're serious about justice, peace, and accountability, even as conservatives. To many Palestinians, the establishment of Israel in 1948 wasn't a moment of hope or freedom. It was a moment of loss. They refer to it as the Nakba, or catastrophe, because hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were displaced from their homes. Entire villages were emptied. Families who had lived on that land for generations were suddenly refugees, scattered across the Middle East. From their point of view, Israel was not built alongside them, it was built on top of them. That foundational trauma has never been addressed. No right of return. No meaningful compensation. And when Palestinians look at the West and especially the United States, they see the biggest supporter of the very state they believe dispossessed them. Now, fast forward to 1967. Israel occupies the West Bank in Gaza. And while Israel withdrew from Gaza in 2005, it has maintained a blockade ever since, alongside repeated military campaigns that have killed thousands, including civilians. In the West Bank, the occupation has lasted over 50 years, with expanding settlements, checkpoints, home demolitions, and a military justice system applied to Palestinians but not to Israeli settlers. From a Palestinian perspective, it looks like colonization, not defense. So when we ask why Palestinians might resent Israel, or the United States, the answer is simple. They see a powerful nuclear-armed state, backed unconditionally by the world's superpower, systematically denying them their rights, their freedom, and their nationhood. They see U.S. weapons used in bombings, and U.S. vetoes at the UN blocking any meaningful criticism of Israel's actions. As conservatives, we should be the first to ask, are we standing for liberty and sovereignty, or are we blindly enabling a situation that contradicts those very ideals? Understanding the Palestinian view isn't about hating Israel, it's about recognizing that if we ever want peace, we have to start by acknowledging reality.
I appreciate that you're trying to understand the Palestinian perspective, and I agree, it's important to acknowledge people's grievances. But I think your framing leaves out some critical context that changes the picture dramatically. Let's start with 1948. Yes, many Palestinians were displaced during the war, but that war didn't just happen. It started because 5 Arab nations launched an invasion the day after Israel declared independence. The Jews accepted the UN partition plan, the Arab leadership rejected it outright. They went to war not just against the partition, but against any Jewish state, no matter how small. That war, and the subsequent displacement, was a direct result of a choice made by Arab governments and local militias, not Israel simply showing up one day and pushing people out. And on the issue of 1967 and the occupation, Israel didn't go looking for that war either. It was a preemptive strike after Egypt closed the Straits of Tiran and moved massive forces toward Israel's border, with open threats of annihilation. After winning, Israel offered to negotiate land for peace, and was met with the infamous 3 no's at the Arab League summit: no peace, no recognition, no negotiations. Regarding Gaza, Israel withdrew completely in 2005. Not just settlements, but every last soldier. What happened next? Hamas took over and turned it into a launching pad for rockets, targeting Israeli civilians, using their own people as human shields. How do you expect Israel to respond to that? Sit back and take it? And yes, the US supports Israel. But for good reason. Israel is a democratic ally, surrounded by regimes that have often promoted extremism, violence, and anti-Western hatred. It's not a perfect country, none are, but it shares our values more than any other state in that region. So yes, Palestinians are frustrated. But frustration doesn't justify decades of terrorism, rejectionism, or the refusal to come to the table. Peace takes 2 sides, and the record shows that Israel has made serious offers for peace, offers that have been repeatedly rejected. If we're going to talk about justice, we can't just tell one side of the story. And if we're going to be conservatives, we should be standing with the only liberal democracy in that region, not undermining it based on a one-sided narrative.
I think you're missing the core issue here. It's not just about standing by an ally, it's about whether that alliance actually serves U.S. national interest in a strategic, long-term way. Let's look at the facts. Since 1948, and especially after 1967, the U.S. has poured over $150 billion in aid into Israel, the vast majority of it military. And it's not just the $3.8 billion annually under the Obama-era MOU. We're talking about advanced missile defense systems like Iron Dome, David Sling, and Arrow, all jointly funded. During major military operations, like in Gaza in 2014 or in 2021, Israel used U.S.-supplied weapons, often in densely populated civilian areas. We have reports from groups like Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch alleging violations of international law. Even if you don't fully buy those reports, the perception in the global south, in Europe, and across the Arab world is that the U.S. bankrolls and shields Israel no matter what it does. That perception isn't just a PR issue, it's a strategic liability. Our blind support damages U.S. credibility when we try to talk about human rights, self-determination, or rules-based order on the world stage. Countries like China and Russia use this hypocrisy to undermine U.S. influence, especially among non-aligned or developing nations. And let's talk about blowback. The U.S. role in backing Israel is one of the most cited grievances by extremist groups that target Americans. I'm not saying we should bend to terrorists, but we should ask, are we fueling hostility that leads to greater danger for our troops, our embassies, or our citizens abroad? As conservatives, we believe in a strong but smart foreign policy. We don't support endless entanglements or handing out blank checks. And what do we get in return? Israel spies on us? Let's not pretend that hasn't happened. The Jonathan Pollard case wasn't ancient history. Israeli policies often contradict our stated goals, like when Netanyahu cozies up to China or opposes our diplomacy with Iran, no matter how strategic or limited. That's not the behavior of a junior ally, that's a state that thinks it can dictate terms because it's untouchable in Washington. Look, this isn't about blaming Israel. It's about reevaluating a relationship that has become so one-sided that it's now undermining U.S. interests. As conservatives, we should support alliances that make America stronger, not ones that drag us into perpetual conflict or hypocrisy. It's not anti-Israel to say that we need a foreign policy based on America first, not Israel always.
I fundamentally disagree with your conclusion that supporting Israel undermines American interests. In fact, I'd argue the US-Israel alliance is one of the most strategically valuable, cost-effective partnerships we have. First, let's talk about military aid. Yes, we give Israel $3.8 billion a year, but that's not some blank check. Nearly all of that money is spent right here in the US on American defense contractors. That means jobs in our defense industry and technological innovation that benefits our own military. Joint programs like Iron Dome and David Sling have also informed US missile defense systems. Israel is not just a recipient of aid, it's a force multiplier for American power in the Middle East. Now, on your point about blowback and perceptions, I won't pretend there aren't critics. But the idea that distancing ourselves from Israel would suddenly end anti-American sentiment is wishful thinking. Radical jihadist groups hated us before we backed Israel, and they'll hate us no matter what we do. Bin Laden didn't attack us because of Gaza, he attacked us because of our values, our presence in the region, and our global influence. Appeasing those who hate us doesn't eliminate the threat, it emboldens it. As for the accusations of spying or disagreements with US policy, welcome to the real world of geopolitics. Every ally, including NATO members, looks out for its own interests. That doesn't mean we cut ties. And by the way, the intelligence and counterterrorism cooperation we get from Israel is among the best in the world. We've stopped attacks, both in the Middle East and elsewhere, thanks to Israeli intel. That kind of partnership is hard to put a price on. And let's not forget, Israel is the only liberal democracy in a region dominated by autocracies, religious extremism, and chaos. Supporting Israel isn't just about sentiment, it's about standing with a stable, pro-American, technologically advanced ally that shares our values of free markets, rule of law, and open society. If we walk away from that, what message does that send to our other allies, to Taiwan, to Eastern Europe, to moderate Arab states? That the US can't be counted on when things get complicated. We've spent far more money on far less reliable partners. Israel gives us real return on investment, militarily, technologically, and diplomatically. Could we expect more accountability? Sure. But pulling back or abandoning the relationship would be a strategic blunder, not a principled correction. Supporting Israel isn't about ideology, it's about good policy, rooted in strength, stability, and shared interests.
We have to be brutally honest here, not just about Israel but about how and why US foreign policy decisions are made. This isn't purely about shared values or military cooperation. A massive part of this relationship is driven by entrenched special interests, namely the military-industrial complex and Israel's lobbying power in Washington. Let's start with the money. You mentioned that the $3.8 billion in annual aid to Israel is spent on US weapons, and you're right, but that's part of the problem. It's not a return on investment for the American people, it's a subsidy for weapons manufacturers. Defense contractors like Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, and Boeing profit handsomely from our foreign aid programs because that money is funneled right back into their pockets. So of course there's bipartisan support for endless military aid. It's great business for the Beltway. That's the military-industrial complex President Eisenhower warned us about. A permanent war economy where foreign aid, defense spending, and foreign policy are driven not by what's best for the American people, but by what benefits defense contractors and the politicians who get their campaign donations. Now let's talk about lobbying. AIPAC and other pro-Israel organizations wield enormous influence in Congress. We've seen this for decades. Any member of Congress who even mildly questions our support for Israel risks getting politically destroyed. That's not a free marketplace of ideas, that's a pressure campaign. It's why you have members of both parties rushing to pass resolutions backing Israel even in the midst of controversial military actions. And it's why Congress can't even consider conditioning aid or applying any meaningful leverage. Let's be clear, this isn't about anti-Semitism as some try to claim. It's about foreign policy being hijacked by domestic lobbying power. That's not how a constitutional republic should function. As conservatives, we believe in accountability, not captured institutions. And here's the bottom line, the American people are waking up to this. Polls show growing skepticism about unconditional support for Israel, especially when our own infrastructure is crumbling, our border is wide open, and our debt is spiraling out of control. Why are we borrowing money from China to fund weapons for a foreign country that regularly defies us diplomatically? If Israel is a sovereign nation, and it is, it should stand on its own 2 feet. That's what true national strength looks like. Our role should not be to bankroll and protect it indefinitely, especially when doing so often puts us in conflict with our own values and undermines our interest in the region. Conservatives should be asking, is this about security, or is it about serving the interests of a small elite that benefits from perpetual entanglement in military spending? Because I'll tell you, that's not America first. That's Washington first.
You're framing this a bit too simplistically. Yes, I agree that the military-industrial complex is real, and yes, lobbying groups have a lot of influence in Washington. But let's not pretend that the US-Israel relationship is simply the result of some shadowy backroom deal. Israel is not the only country that benefits from American aid or lobbying. The Gulf states, Egypt, and others all have significant influence too. The difference is Israel is a democracy, a liberal democracy, with shared values, values we claim to champion. That's why our support for them isn't just about money or lobbying, but about aligning with a like-minded partner. The military-industrial complex is a separate issue, and I'm not denying its influence. I think we both agree that the defense spending in this country is out of control, and that's something we need to rein in, whether it's for Israel or any other country. But blaming Israel or its supporters exclusively for that is missing the larger picture. We're talking about a relationship where we have strategic interests, yes, that includes military interests, but also intelligence, counterterrorism, and countering adversaries like Iran. But, and here's where I need to be clear, the growing resentment toward Israel in the conversation is increasingly tinged with anti-Semitism. And that's not something I'll stand by. It's one thing to criticize a nation's policies, but we need to be really careful when criticism of Israel slides into singling out the Jewish state for unique blame in a way that no other nation on earth is treated. This isn't about Israel's actions being beyond reproach, it's about ensuring we hold Israel to the same standard we hold any other ally to, but also that we don't tolerate hate or bigotry disguised as political criticism. And this is happening, we see it in Europe, we see it on the far left here in the US, and it's poisoning the debate. It's one thing to say, Israel should not be doing X or Y, and I've said it myself. But when that turns into blanket condemnations, comparing Israel to Nazi Germany, or supporting BDS, that's anti-Semitism. It's disproportionate criticism and it veers into the kind of language that delegitimizes Israel's right to exist, not just its actions. And that's where I draw the line. You're right that there are powerful interest groups in Washington, but let's not pretend that every criticism of Israel comes from a place of genuine concern for American interests or foreign policy. Some of it is rooted in age-old prejudices, and we can't ignore that. I agree we need to reassess foreign aid and entanglements, but that reassessment must be done through the lens of what's best for American national interests, not through the lens of what's politically expedient. And Israel remains a key ally in a dangerous, unstable region, and I believe, despite its flaws, Israel stands as a beacon of freedom and democracy in a place where those values are too often under attack.
I have to push back again because there are some things we need to confront honestly. I'm not trying to deny that Israel has a right to exist, or that Hamas is a dangerous threat. What I'm saying is that the wider context, especially US and Israeli involvement, plays a huge role in creating the instability we see today. Let's not forget that there is plenty of evidence to suggest that the US and Israel have directly contributed to the destabilization in the region. Look at the Iran-Iraq War, for example. The US supported Saddam Hussein during that war in the 1980s, even though Saddam was using chemical weapons on his own people. We also supported a variety of authoritarian regimes, whether it was Saudi Arabia, Egypt, or even the Shah of Iran, for strategic purposes, but that came at a cost. We propped up brutal regimes in the name of stability, which led to resentment and the growth of extremism in many cases. And let's not forget the 2003 invasion of Iraq, which destabilized the entire region and created a power vacuum that gave rise to groups like ISIS. That war was sold to the American public on the premise of countering terrorism, but the end result was chaos, sectarian violence, and a whole new wave of radicalism. Israel in many ways has been caught up in this dynamic as well, whether it's through its role in Lebanon or in the context of the broader Middle East power struggles. Now, regarding criticism of Israel, you're absolutely right that there are people who use the situation to express anti-Semitic views, and that's disgusting. But not every anti-Israel standpoint is rooted in anti-Semitism. In fact, I think many people who criticize Israel, even passionately, do so because they are genuinely concerned about human rights, justice, and international law, not because they have a problem with Jews or Judaism. You see, John, Israel is not above criticism, nor should it be. The state of Israel, just like any other nation, should be held to account for its actions, whether it's settlements in the West Bank, the displacement of Palestinians, or the disproportionate use of force in military operations. The critique is about policy, not about the legitimacy of Israel itself. There's a difference between opposing a nation's actions and demonizing the people because of their nationality or religion. Just like we criticize American foreign policy, and I think we should regularly, criticizing Israel's policies doesn't mean we hate Jews. It means we're standing up for justice and peace. Israel's actions, especially in the occupied territories, have led to a situation where peace feels impossible, where violence is the default response. Israel's policies, combined with American backing of those policies, have fueled the cycle of hatred, and that's where the real issue lies. It's not just about Hamas and rockets, it's about the long-term occupation, the denial of Palestinian self-determination, and the inability to find a viable political solution that addresses the legitimate aspirations of both Israelis and Palestinians. The US cannot be an honest broker in the peace process if it continues to give unconditional support to one side while ignoring the rights and grievances of the other. And frankly, Israel's occupation and treatment of Palestinians, no matter how difficult the situation is, needs to be part of the conversation if we're going to move toward a lasting peace. I believe there's a way forward, but it requires honesty and a willingness to look at all sides of the issue. This isn't about hating Israel. This is about demanding accountability and pushing for a genuine peace that includes both peoples, not just one. We can do better than this endless cycle of violence, and the US can be part of that if it shifts its approach.
There's a difference between understanding complexity and using it to excuse barbarism. Because while you're pointing to history books and drawing broad systemic critiques, Israeli parents are still burying babies who were beheaded, burned alive, or shot point blank in their homes on October 7th. You want to talk about the wider context? Fine. Let's talk about it. But don't use occupation and US foreign policy mistakes as if they justify, or even explain, the mass rape of women, the abduction of children, and the deliberate targeting of civilians. That wasn't a protest. That wasn't resistance. That was a massacre. And if we can't start the conversation by unequivocally condemning that evil, without qualifying it, then we're not having an honest discussion. You say Israel's response is disproportionate? What would you have them do? Send strongly worded letters while their citizens are dragged into tunnels and the world shrugs? Israel didn't start this war, Hamas did. And Israel didn't ask for hostages to be taken, Hamas did that. You want to see fewer dead children? Start by holding the side that uses children as shields accountable. Start by condemning the ones hiding in hospitals and firing rockets from playgrounds. That's not on Israel. That's on the terrorists who exploit their own people to protect themselves. And yes, criticism of Israel is legitimate, but let's not pretend we're just talking about policy here. Because what I've seen lately goes way beyond that. From the river to the sea isn't a call for peace, it's a call for ethnic cleansing. Campus protests aren't filled with thoughtful critiques of settlements, they're chanting for intifada and waving terrorist flags. That's not nuance, David. That's hate, pure and simple. And it doesn't go away just because someone puts a human rights sticker on it. The truth is, Israel, for all its flaws, is doing what any nation would do when its people are hunted, humiliated, and murdered. And it's doing so in a world that seems more outraged by its response than by the triggering atrocity. You want America to be an honest broker? Then it starts with moral clarity. No more false equivalence. No more pretending that hostage-taking and counterstrikes are morally equal. If we abandon our allies when they're under siege, we're not just losing influence, we're losing our soul.
But here's the truth you won't confront. Bombing civilians is still bombing civilians, no matter how many times you say Israel doesn't target them. Intentions don't erase body counts. And when you level entire neighborhoods, flatten hospitals, and drop 2,000-pound bombs on refugee camps, you're not just trying to hit Hamas. You're killing innocent people. That's not collateral damage at that point. That's policy. And this isn't new. Let's stop pretending this is just about October 7th. Israel's military response has followed the same pattern for decades. Disproportionate force, overwhelming firepower, and zero accountability. Operation Cast Lead. Protective Edge. The wars in Gaza in 2008, 2012, 2014, and again in 2021. Every time there's a flare-up, it ends with thousands of Palestinian civilians dead, their infrastructure in ruins, and the West shrugging it off as self-defense. Now you want to say Hamas hides among civilians? Fine. But when Israel knows that and still bombs those places anyway, that's not an excuse, that's a choice. You don't get to kill children and then say, well, we warned them to leave. Leave to where, John? Gaza is a fenced-in open-air prison. There's nowhere to go. That's the point. You accuse critics of moral relativism, but I think you're the one blurring lines here. Because no matter how evil Hamas is, and yes, they are evil, that doesn't give Israel the moral blank check to wipe out entire city blocks and displace over 1 million people. And if you think this ends with Hamas, you're fooling yourself. The evidence is right in front of us. This isn't about Hamas anymore, it's about Palestinians as a whole. Let's be honest. There are members of Israel's government, sitting ministers, who openly talk about removing Palestinians, annexing the West Bank, and making Gaza uninhabitable. That's not a fringe view. That's mainstream in Israeli politics right now. And what do we call it when one ethnic or national group seeks to forcibly remove another from land it has lived on for generations? I'll let you fill in that blank. And America? We're footing the bill. We send billions in aid, weapons, and diplomatic cover so Israel can act with impunity. And what do we get in return? Blowback, instability, and a moral stain on our hands. This isn't supporting an ally. This is enabling a long-term occupation that violates every principle we claim to believe in: liberty, rule of law, national sovereignty. You keep saying Israel has the right to defend itself. Sure. But Palestinians have that right too, and they've been under occupation, siege, and military rule for decades. At some point, you either support freedom and justice for everyone, or you admit this is about choosing one side and dehumanizing the other. So let's call it what it is. Israel is not just defending itself. It's enforcing a system of control, exclusion, and domination, and the bombs are part of that system. And no amount of justification changes the fact that dead civilians are dead civilians, whether they're in Tel Aviv or Khan Yunis. You can't build peace on a mountain of rubble and corpses, no matter how righteous you think your cause is.
It is not the same. Israelis were murdered in cold blood.
And what is happening to the Palestinians exactly? It seems to me that they are just worthless collateral to Israel.
All right, fellas. You have each had a chance to present your side of the argument. Now, each of you will present a closing statement as a last-ditch effort to defend your standpoint. David, please give your statement first.
I appreciate the passion here, I really do. But at the end of the day, this isn't about who yells louder or who waves the most flags. This is about what's right, what's just, and what aligns with American values and interests. I'm not here to defend Hamas. They're terrorists and their tactics are reprehensible. But we can't let that blind us to the broader truth. Israel's policies over the past several decades, from military occupations to settlement expansions to relentless bombing campaigns, have created a system where millions of Palestinians live without rights, freedom, or hope. That's not self-defense. That's domination. And when the response to terrorism is to collectively punish an entire population, it stops being justice and starts being vengeance. What makes this worse is that we are bankrolling it. Billions of American tax dollars go to a foreign government that frankly doesn't act like an ally anymore, spying on us, interfering in our politics, and dragging us into endless conflict. We have veterans sleeping on the streets, our border in chaos, and a $30 trillion debt. Yet Washington keeps writing blank checks to a country that bombs refugee camps and tells us it's doing it in the name of democracy. That's not America first, that's America last. We're told over and over that Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East. But what kind of democracy holds millions of people under military rule? What kind of democracy shoots journalists and medics, bulldozes homes, and blocks humanitarian aid? If we're going to stand for freedom, then it has to be for everyone, not just our allies of convenience. This debate isn't about choosing between Jews and Muslims, Israelis and Palestinians. It's about choosing between endless war and the possibility of peace. Between blind loyalty and honest leadership. Between a foreign policy based on fear and one based on principle. I love my country and I believe we can do better. We should support policies that reflect our values, not perpetuate cycles of violence. We should stop enabling bad behavior abroad and start prioritizing stability, justice, and our own people here at home. America doesn't owe Israel unconditional support. What we owe, to ourselves and to the world, is integrity. That's what being pro-America really means.
John, your final word, please.
I respect your desire for moral consistency and restraint, but I think you're missing the forest for the trees. This debate isn't just about bombs and borders. It's about whether we stand with civilization or surrender it to barbarism. You talk about Israel like it's just another foreign country with a troubled record. But it's not. It's the only liberal democracy in a region dominated by tyrants, terror groups, and theocratic regimes. It's a place where women vote, LGBT people live freely, Arab citizens serve in parliament, and courts challenge the government. Is it perfect? No. But show me another country in that region, or frankly, anywhere, that faces existential threats on every border and still operates under the rule of law. Let's not forget what started this latest war, not a protest, not a land dispute, but the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. Babies burned alive. Grandmothers dragged through the streets. Children taken hostage by animals who live-streamed their crimes. That's what Israel is fighting against, not a freedom movement, not a resistance, but genocidal jihadists who openly say, we love death more than you love life. And when Israel responds, after warnings, after evacuations, after being told to show restraint while their civilians are still held in tunnels, the world lines up to condemn them. That's not justice. That's moral cowardice. You say we should put America first. I agree. But that includes standing by allies who share our values, who defend themselves without asking Americans to fight for them, and who serve as a bulwark against chaos in one of the most dangerous parts of the world. If we turn our back on Israel now, we send a message to every ally, every enemy: the United States can't be trusted. We stand for nothing. We protect no one. And I'm not interested in an America that lets our allies bleed while we wring our hands and pretend neutrality is noble. That's not foreign policy. That's surrender dressed up as principle. Here's the bottom line: Israel fights not because it wants to, but because it must. If it lays down its weapons, it dies. If Hamas lays down its weapons, there's peace. That tells you everything. So yes, I stand with Israel, proudly, unapologetically, because in a world full of tyrants and terrorists, I'd rather be on the side of imperfect freedom than perfect evil. That's what moral clarity looks like.
Okay. Thank you both for participating in this discussion. And thank you all for watching. Please vote in the comments which side you believe won this debate. Smooth,